everyone, and welcome back to Sunday Reads with Renee here at Simply Renee. My name is Renee. I just want to say thank you to everyone who's liked, shared, commented, subscribed, and clicked the notification bell to my channel. I truly appreciate it as it helps me to grow, and thank you so much also for watching the videos and shorts. I truly appreciate that as well, and it helps me to bring more content to you going forward in the future. Before I begin the video, though, I just want to let everyone know I will be using alternative words and phrases due to YouTube rules and regulations. I'm using more voiceovers and visuals for this video than anything else, mainly because I'm having the ECs going as much as possible due to the fact that we're experiencing a 10-day heat wave here in Rhode Island, so I want to keep us all as cool as possible. And also, I'm going to be revealing plot details and endings to a mini-series as well as some books, therefore spoilers are ahead. For today's video, I wanted to discuss the topic of infidelity in romance novels. Now, for me, I do love romance novels, especially when the main couple gets together and they ride off happily into the sunset after everything they experience and all the buildup goes to that ending where it's like, yes, they're together and it's fantastic. And I love it as well. I think it's great when a pair that is so connected and so in love finally get together and ride off into the sunset on happy trails no matter what. But there is a reality to infidelity in romance books because while not every romance novel has infidelity as a plot device or trope, it is something that is frequently used in different types of romance novels, and that has created a lot of criticism on the internet and social media, and perfectly understandable because I do think it is a valid criticism. Now, for me, I understand why infidelity, whether it's physical, emotional, or a mixture of both, do come into these romance storylines. They're meant to create tension, drama, and build-up, whether that's love triangles or the typical I'm in love with my best friend's significant other. It's there, of course, to create the drama, tension, and the build-up for the main couple to get together because they have better chemistry, more compatible. Now, when it comes to infidelity in romance novels, it's the physical, where you're kissing, sharing the same bed, and more. And there's also the emotional, where you're not getting physical, but you are feeling these connections, longings, and yearnings for each other when you shouldn't be because there is that forbidden aspect. Now, when it comes to the infidelity in romance novels, it has been in there before. Not every romance novel has this, of course, but it is there for a reliable plot device trope, which I do think is reliable. And the reason for that is because it's meant to create tension, build up, and drama for the main couple to get together because you feel for them and you really want them to get together. And there's something about the forbidden aspect which really does appeal to some people, even myself. I like the forbidden aspect as well. But I do agree that there is a valid criticism to having infidelity in romance novels, which is why I wanted to explore it today, because there is that valid critique that we might be unintentionally romanticizing these infidelity with the main couple, because while we want them to get together, are we romanticizing it when we shouldn't be, even if it makes sense for them to be together? And that's what I really wanted to explore today. There are plenty of examples of this, such as The Notebook by Nicholas Sparks. Now, depending on which version you watch, both the book and film are pretty closely similar to each other, except for a few things, but basically the story is still the same. Now, Noah and Allie are two people that met and fell in love as teenagers, but parted ways due to class differences. Now, as adults, they have a second chance to be together when meeting again. However, Allie is engaged to another man named Lon. He's genuinely a good, stable man who loves her, but because she still loves Noah and vice versa, Allie decides to act on her feelings both emotionally and physically. On an emotional level, Allie engages in longings for Noah, in which she meets up with him again. She just has to meet him, speak with him, get some things off her chest, but also just see where he's at after 14 years apart. And now she's engaged, so it does create all these conflictions between them because he's still in love with her as well. Then it becomes physical with kisses and sharing a bed because the passion and love are still there. Now, Noah and Allie, I believe, were written to be this great love story. I truly believe that, and I think that is true to an certain extent. They have this second chance at love that they take, they get married, have children, and seemingly seem to have a very happy life together, even into old age. And when challenges come their way, such as Allie being diagnosed with dementia and put in a nursing home, Noah joins her. He's battling his own various illnesses, but he still wants to be close to Allie as much as possible, so he joins her in the same nursing home home. He has conversations with her while she's in her dementia state to try and tell their love story to her in hopes that she will remember anything. And once that memory jars, she'll come back to him and they can spend that time together connecting and really remembering everything. And they're able to do that even if it's just for a few hours. So there is something very heartwarming about that to me, where even in their old age, there still is this love, devotion, and connection. So there is this heartwarming feeling I get about Noah and Allie in that sense, where even in their old age, there's still that love and passion and devotion to each other. All this would be very touching and moving if it wasn't for the infidelity they commit. Yes, they were toxic as teens, and Allie's mother contributed to that separation by keeping Noah's letters away from Allie when he sent them and not letting her decide for herself what she wants. Still, it has been years and you've both grown away from each other. More importantly, one of you is engaged. Lon was not a bad person. Even when older Noah reads his and Allie's love story, it's acknowledged that Lon was a good man who got hurt in this. Allie did not take pleasure in hurting him, I believe, but ultimately she does not regret her decision to be with Noah and to spend her life with him. Unfortunately, that second chance romance came about from infidelity and was romanticized. There's no denying that Noah and Allie went on to have an apparently happy life together and really just enjoying their lives together, raising a family and living their life and still loving each other even into old age. But someone did get hurt in this, and that is very painful. There are other examples outside of the notebook that really take this plot device of infidelity, whether it's on an emotional, physical, or a mixture of both, into the storyline to really create a reliable plot device to drive this drama, tension, and buildup. Yet at the same time, there is a sense of, is it being romanticized or is it being used just as a plot device to get to the main point? One example I can give is The Night We Met by Abby Jimenez. Now, this is a book from 2026 that I love. It's one of the best books I've read this year. I enjoyed it truly. But there is an acknowledgement that there was an emotional infidelity happening between Larissa and Chris throughout the book. Larissa and Chris met one night at a concert and failed to connect because they are a compatible pair, but they failed to connect as a result of the fact that Larissa took Chris's standoffish behavior as something negative. She was unaware that Chris had just recently lost his mother, and as a result, he was very standoffish, wasn't really in the mood for chit chat. And because of that, Larissa misinterpreted it as standoffish behavior, and so she went instead to Chris's best friend Mike to really have that connection, and they ended up dating. Several months goes by and Mike asks Chris to do him a favor one morning. He's unable to really help Larissa out like he had planned, and so Chris decides to be a good friend, help Larissa out. And in helping Larissa out, they end up getting to know each other a little bit better. Larissa learns a little bit more about him, finds out why he was so standoffish that night at the concert, and she really starts to enjoy his company. They start off in a sort of platonic friend type way, even though Chris is more of a one-sided individual in this. He still longs for Larissa and he has some resentment to the fact that she and Mike are dating because he does feel that he and Larissa are more compatible the more he gets to know her. But nonetheless, he does acknowledge that he can't be with her because it's his best friend's girlfriend and he doesn't want to overstep those bounds completely. And he doesn't want to cause any problems because he does care about his best friend Mike. Meanwhile, Larissa is going through her own shared problems, trying to pay off this credit card debt because her father took a bunch of credit cards out in her name and now has driven up the debt so much she's now having to work multiple jobs to pay it off while also staying afloat. And she tends to turn to Mike for a little bit more emotional support and help with that, but unfortunately, it's not working out very well. Mike is not a bad guy in general, but he is a bad boyfriend overall. He's going through his own set of crises in mental health as well as depression, a dependence on an addiction, and he's also struggling with a career and lack thereof, along with financial uncertainties and situations. And so he's not really having a great time with himself either. And as a result, he becomes a bad boyfriend. He doesn't really be there for Larissa, and he continually forgets that she has a nut allergy, which is a very serious thing. And as a result, it does push Larissa away from him at certain points, and she does start to grow to have feelings for Chris, who's always there, very reliable and stable, and he continues to grow feelings for her as well, but both of them know deep down internally it can never be between them because they do care about Mike. Larissa wants to work things out, and Chris doesn't want to, again, overstep the boundaries and lose a very good friend because he knows it's not going to end well. Now, what happens at the end of this book, or at least towards the climax, is that everything comes to a head. Eventually, Mike's lies and his situation do come out into the open. Larissa realizes she can't go on with this relationship when it's like this, and so she breaks up with Mike. He doesn't take it very well, understandably, because he still cares about her and does love her and wants to work it out. But because she doesn't want to, he starts to get very angry and in a heartbroken state, starts to drink a little bit too much, and as a result, everything just reaches to a climax where he, in an inebriated state, kisses her, only he doesn't realize that he actually ate something with nuts. And because of that, she ends up going into a complete state of allergic reaction, very hyperventilated allergic reaction. And because of that, Chris gets out the EpiPen that he had for her to make sure she gets that EpiPen and she's saved from having that major allergic reaction. But because Chris is so angry with how poorly Mike was in this situation, what a bad boyfriend and bad person he was to really put Larissa in serious harm, he ends up punching Mike, and as a result, their friendship is severed, even though it's only temporary. And for Chris, that does bother him because even though he believes he was in the right to call out Mike's bad behavior in this because he did put Larissa in danger, it ends up severing an entire friendship. And it bothers him because he did care about Mike. He considered Mike and Mike's family his second home, and that mattered to him. And Larissa is sad about this as well because she did care about Mike, and she's sad about the fact that she now has these feelings for Chris, but doesn't really know what to go about it because it was the best friend of her now ex boyfriend. And Chris feels the same way. Now, the difference between The Notebook and The Night We Met is that Lon in The Notebook is framed as a good, stable guy. There's really nothing wrong with him other than the fact that Allie just knows that Noah is her true love and that's who she's supposed to be with. Whereas Mike is just someone Larissa is dating at the time. And unfortunately, he's just not a very good boyfriend and he's having a lot of problems. He's framed in The Night We Met to be a flawed, bad boyfriend, unfortunately. And when we find out what's going on with him, it makes a little sense why he's not really getting it together. He's going through a mental health crisis. He's very depressed. He's unhappy with the way his life is going and doesn't really know what to do about it, despite the advice Chris is giving him of saying, hey, start your own gym. Maybe consider going into the plumbing business a little more because you're very talented about it. And unfortunately, Mike is not taking that advice to really improve himself. And as a result, he's depending on addiction in order to numb the pain that he's feeling. And as a result, he fails to be there for Larissa when she needs him. And it makes sense to me why she does eventually grow tired of that relationship, even really not being able to really see the red flags at first or ignoring them and trying to hope for the best, when in reality, she really should have left him a long time ago. And it's not surprising she goes to other people and starts to be more drawn to Chris, who she realizes is more compatible with her. At the same time, there is that emotional infidelity, which isn't good. And as a result, it causes a lot of strife in Chris's relationship with Larissa as well as Mike. And by the end of the book, Mike does get his act together. He starts to really go into the plumbing business more. He stops depending on alcohol and really starts to get his life together. He even comes to Chris to say, hey, I already knew there was something going on between you. I know you didn't get physical, but I knew you both liked each other. So it doesn't surprise me that you're together now. And there is a sense of the reconciliation starting to form. He even apologizes to Larissa, so maybe they can reconcile and start anew, possibly as friends. But there is that sense of disappointment as well, because there was an emotional infidelity that went on between Larissa and Chris, even though it never went physical. And it did end up hurting someone in this, which is Mike, who, even though he had an inkling to it and was a bad boyfriend, I don't think he deserved to be cheated on. I don't think he deserved to be someone that now has to watch as the person he loved is dating his best friend, even though they weren't really compatible. And he knows perfectly well that Larissa and Chris are more compatible. So that one was a little bit more perplexing to me, but I don't necessarily see it as romanticizing emotional infidelity because, again, The Night We Met does address the fact that Chris and Larissa know this is wrong. Chris knows perfectly well that he can't date Larissa because it's his best friend's girlfriend, and even if Mike and Larissa were to break up, they couldn't be together. And they do end up being together anyway because they can't deny their feelings. But both Larissa and Chris do acknowledge that this came from a place of pain because they ended up actually hurting someone along the way, and now they have to figure out what to do about it, especially when they still have their mutual group. And to be clear, I still love this book. I think it's a great book. It's one of the best I read in 2026, but I do think it's important to critique that and acknowledge it. Again, I don't necessarily see it as romanticizing infidelity because I don't think that was the intention compared to the Notebook, which unfortunately does romanticize infidelity in that way. But there is a purpose to why this infidelity was placed in the book, to create drama, tension, and buildup. But I do like how The Night We Met really framed it as what it was, which is a bad thing and something that is guilt and there is remorse on all party sides. Whereas in The Notebook, there isn't too much of that, even though it's sort of acknowledged. And that's just how I feel about these two books in terms of how they handle infidelity in their respective storylines. When it comes to The Night We Met, they use, of course, the emotional infidelity plot device between Larissa and Chris, but they also add in the I'm in love with my best friend's significant other to really heighten the drama and the tension, and it's always a reliable plot device as well, along with the emotional infidelity, which makes things a little more complicated but also dramatic and creates that nice little build-up that we expect. And you can find that in two other books, One Day in December by Josie Silver and Something Borrowed by Emily Giffen. Now I'm going to start with Something Borrowed because it is a little bit of a train wreck from the first read. You might be more familiar with it from the 2011 film version starring Kate Hudson, but they are pretty much similar to each other. Something Borrowed is basically about two best friends named Rachel and Darcy, and Rachel always felt like she was in the shadow of Darcy because Rachel sees herself as kind of a plain Jane with not the similar sparkling personality of Darcy, who's also a little bit prettier, but nonetheless, they are very good friends. They care about each other, and they are reaching a little bit of milestones as they approach 30. Rachel is a successful lawyer who's doing very well in her career, while Darcy is engaged to a man named Dex, who is a friend and former law school classmates of Rachel's. Then, one night on her 30th birthday, Rachel ends up doing something that she didn't expect, which is that she gets inebriated with Dex and they end up having a one-night stand. And both have regrets about it in the morning, but it does bring out these long dormant feelings that they both have had for each other. And back in law school, they were very good friends, they liked each other, and then the feelings started to grow to more romantic, but they never really said it to each other. And as a result, they never got the opportunity to really see where this could go or grow or admit their feelings. As a result, Dex ended up dating Darcy, and after a few years, they became engaged. You think everything would be fine, but nope, they have this brief one-night stand. There is regret there, but it does bring out these long dormant feelings. Now, a lot of things do start to happen throughout the novel in different ways, and in the end, Dex decides to break off things with Darcy because he is in love with Rachel and does want to be with her and vice versa. But then things start to take a turn. While they're at Rachel's apartment, Dex goes into hiding in another room because Darcy's coming up to talk to Rachel about the breakup. And in this moment, Darcy reveals that she did have a brief fling with another man because of Dex's distance, unaware that it was because of Rachel. And as a result, Darcy is now pregnant with this other man's child and feels very happy about it. However, before she leaves the apartment, she notices a piece of clothing that belongs to Dex, and suddenly she puts two and two together and realizes that these two have had an affair behind her back. Everything explodes where Dex and Darcy try to justify things, but Rachel is very upset and heartbroken because she doesn't want to lose her friendship with Darcy, even though she's always had this kind of deep-seated resentment towards Darcy, and she always felt like she was a little too selfish. She did nonetheless care about Darcy and that friendship. It meant something to her, but they end up parting ways as friends. It's a horrible breakup, and then in the sequel, it tells a little bit more about Darcy's side, and she seems to go down the reconciliation with Rachel and vice versa, but it really did explode in a lot of different ways and does bring up all this drama, tension, and buildup. Now, when it comes to One Day in December by Josie Silver, it's a little bit of a different situation. Now, what happens in this book is that Lori and Jack meet at a bus stop and it's love at first sight, but they fail to connect and speak with each other. Months go by and Lori's unable to really find that mystery man she fell in love with, but then suddenly he comes back into her life again, only this time he's a new boyfriend of Lori's best friend Sarah, thereby creating this whole complication because here she is in love with the man who is now the the boyfriend of her best friend, and it just creates this emotional infidelity. Both Lori and Jack did recognize each other and acknowledge that they do like each other, but they can't be together. They know that and they accept the reality and begin to move on with their lives. If Lori, in fact, even starts dating another man, and things seem to be moving along, but then everything starts to take a turn. Jack and Sarah end up breaking up. Lori gets married to another man, and a falling out does happen with Lori and Sarah because Sarah realizes after her breakup with Jack that Jack was the mystery man that Lori fell in love with on that bus stop, thereby causing problems with them, and they end up breaking their friendship temporarily. They do eventually mend it and start again as friends, and things seem to be moving ahead. But then other things happen throughout the years, and finally, after about 10, 12 years of Jack and Lori not really making it work or really connecting, they end up coming together again. By then, Lori has divorced her husband because not just her emotional infidelity of thinking about Jack once in a while during that marriage, but also because her husband is more focused on his career. And because of that, they end up parting ways. So it makes things clear for Jack and Lori to get together. And this time they do decide to admit their feelings. And they are now together at the end and looking forward to the future. Now, there is a difference between Something Borrowed and One Day in December, where the infidelity in their storylines plays a part in everything. And that is because Something Borrowed romanticizes cheating, whereas One Day in December, I don't think necessarily does. When it comes to Something Borrowed, Darcy is framed as a villain in a way because she's selfish and uppity and everything like that. But in reality, she's the one that is getting affected by this because I don't think she deserved to be cheated on when Dex and Rachel should be the bad ones. Yes, they are the more compatible pair. There is something there between them. But in reality, Rachel's Darcy's best friend. Dex is Darcy's fiance. That is a no-no. And now you're trying to romanticize this relationship when it shouldn't be, which is why I do like that Giffen did have a repercussion to that, where Darcy finds out the truth about what happened and she does have a reaction, which is justified. Yes, Darcy shouldn't have had a brief affair with another man, which has now resulted in a pregnancy. I don't think she should have done that either. But in reality, Dex and Rachel aren't exactly the good guys either. So there is a whole thing there where everyone is kind of a bad person, but nonetheless, I do think that Darcy didn't deserve to be cheated on. I don't think that should have led to her brief affair, of course, but I don't think she deserved it. And the sequel to this book does have a storyline for Darcy where she does go on to her own journey, especially into motherhood and new changes in her life. And by that novel's end, there seems to be a reconciliation between her and Rachel that will happen. But other than that, I do think there were a lot of repercussions that I think Giffen did do well in this book to really show the aftermath of what happens when you have an affair with your best friend's significant other and vice versa. So I do think there is that reality check that I do appreciate Giffen putting out there. Now, when it comes to One Day in December, I don't think there was necessarily a romanticizing and cheating there. I do think it was meant to just be a plot device of, oh, dear, what do we do now? Because in Lori and Jack's case, they do recognize each other from that bus stop when they meet months later, but because they do care a lot for Sarah and don't want to hurt her, they decide to just part ways and accept the reality of it. Lori does try to move on and eventually does to a new husband, and also Jack ends up parting ways with Sarah but moving on himself, but they both don't stop thinking about each other, which is why I see it as more emotional infidelity, but I don't think it was intended to romanticize infidelity. I think it was just used as a reliable plot device to kind of keep them apart, and as they grow separately and together and figure things out on their own, and create that also build up to when they do eventually get together, even though it takes a little more than 10 years. So I understand why it is that the authors are using this reliable plot device in both of these novels, but again, I do think Something Borrowed is romanticizing cheating, whereas One Day in December is not necessarily romanticizing it. With that being said, the final book I'll talk about in terms of infidelity in romance books is The Light We Lost by Jill Stenopolo, which is sort of similar to The Notebook in a way, but very different as well. The book is about Lucy and Gabe, who meet on 9/11 as college seniors, and due to this tragedy, they end up deciding to do something meaningful with their lives as they go forward in adult careers. But they also connect, get along pretty well, and they feel this is really meant to be and that they could explore it, but they don't really do it in the beginning until about a year later when they end up meeting again. And they do take that chance to really explore that relationship while building their careers, they end up falling in love, really feeling this is meant to be. But because their careers are in different places that they really want to explore and elevate, they end up not being on the same page of where they need to be, and they part ways as a result. Gabe goes on to become a globetrotting photojournalist, winning awards and praise, while Lucy ends up pursuing a career in kids television, doing programming that has won awards and praise as well. So they're having very successful careers, but they never really come together again during that time because Lucy ends up wanting a little bit more stability and marries a man named Darren who offers her that and is a good man if he's a little bit flaky in some ways. But they do end up getting married, starting a family, and having a life together. However, in the back of Lucy's mind, Gabe still remains. He was this person who really influenced her when she really needed it the most to start her career and her trajectory and where she wanted to go. And there are hints from Gabe that he still thinks about her too, because they have these little interactions throughout about 13 years into their journey. And they also really get the rise of social media going where they have that interaction as well, though it never goes very far into the physical. It's only more of an emotional infidelity here and there. Nearly 13 years into their journey, Lucy and Gabe end up having a brief affair that does become a physical infidelity, partly brought on by Lucy's belief that Darren is having an affair. She noticed some things a little strange and assumes he is having an affair and cheating on her. However, Lucy ends up parting ways with Gabe because she realizes she needs to keep her family together and try to work things out with Darren, only to discover that Darren never cheated on her. The reason he was acting so strangely and mysterious is because he was trying to surprise her with a beach home he purchased because they'd always talked about having a beach home, thereby creating a lot of guilt on Lucy's end that she's had a brief affair with her ex on a man who wasn't committing infidelity with her and who is just a good guy trying to surprise her and be a decent husband and father. So Lucy and Gabe go from an emotional infidelity to a physical one in this book, and it does have repercussions. Lucy discovers she is pregnant with Gabe's child and doesn't know what to do from there. And at the same time, tragedy strikes when Gabe ends up going on life support after an injury on the field and ends up tragically passing away as a result of his wounds. It's very heartbreaking, and you really do feel for Lucy because she did love Gabe and vice versa. This is someone that she cared a lot about. And now that she's carrying his child, it makes it even more difficult because Gabe's never going to know his child, and Lucy doesn't know what to tell Darren because this isn't his child. And where do we go from here? And how much is this going to really affect her entire family and her life? So it does create a lot of repercussions that are very difficult for everybody involved. There is a sequel to The Light We Lost, which I haven't read yet, but from what I gather about the summary and other people having read it, it does show repercussions to the endings of the previous book, in which Darren and Lucy have now divorced, but they are raising their kids together. In fact, Darren's even raising Gabe's child, Samuel, as his own, and they've made a decision not to tell Samuel who his biological child is. But now Lucy is met with a situation where, since her divorce with Darren is finalized and she discovers some things about Gabe's past and trying to reconnect with him in that way, that she's considering, do I tell Samuel the truth about his origins? How is that going to affect things? But basically, what I think the sequel does, even from what I've read it, is that it's trying to show those repercussions in the aftermath. Because even though Lucy and Gabe were soulmates, there still was infidelity that happened. And it is a very tragic story because Gabe never gets to meet his child because he passes away unexpectedly. And Lucy is now left with that tug of war in her heart and sorts in that way. And also, her ex husband had to deal with the aftermath of that as well. And I think it's great that he wants to raise him as his own, but there is a repercussion there in which a lot of people got hurt in this, and now you have to figure out where you go from here. So I might consider reading the book at some point, but I'm not really sure. But that's what I gathered from this book, and I appreciate that there was a repercussion in the aftermath of the infidelity that happened and how they deal with that. So I think it sounds like it works a little bit better in the sequel than anything else. But if anyone does have read the sequel, then please let me know how that turns out because I would like to know a little bit about it, and I don't mind being spoiled either. Now, to come to my basic conclusions about these novels, which do have infidelity as a plot device in it, I do think it's meant to be a reliable plot device at first. I do think it's meant to really create tension, drama, and build up to get to the conclusion to make us feel like we are seeing this couple together. We're rooting for them. We're excited that they are together, and we feel that they should be together and ride off into the sunset. It's something that I still like to an extent because I get why it's there and I understand why it's put there. At the same time, I do agree with others that we shouldn't be romanticizing infidelity and we should take a little bit more criticism to see, like, maybe we shouldn't use it as a way to romanticize infidelity because that is a severe problem and someone else does get hurt in the process. In the case of One Day in December, The Notebook, and The Night We Met, there are minor repercussions to the infidelity that takes place, whereas The Night We Met and One Day in December are more of an emotional infidelity. The Notebook was both emotional and a physical infidelity, and there were no major repercussions to that for different reasons. The Notebook didn't have any major repercussions because, even though Noah and Allie go on to have a very happy, loving life together, there is the factor that Lon got hurt in this because he was a good, stable guy who did love Allie, wanted to spend his life with her, and now he gets lost in the shuffle and hurt by this because she chooses to be with her ex who she was meant to be with. Even though Noah and Allie go off to have a great life together, there is that factor in it that I do think created this romanticization of infidelity between Noah and Allie. Yes, you're a great love story to an extent, but you also started it from infidelity. In the case of One Day in December and The Night We Met, there is a minor repercussion to that infidelity that was on an emotional level. Even though Jack and Lori end up together in One Day in December and Larissa and Chris end up together in The Night We Met, there is an acknowledgement that there was an emotional infidelity that came through it that got other people hurt in the process and caused some pain even to themselves. They realize, hey, we loved each other, but there are some people that got hurt along the way and we have to acknowledge this. So I think those authors did a little bit better in trying to at least acknowledge that while this couple was more compatible and meant to be, and we're putting them together, you have to factor in the fact that it came from a place of uncertainty, pain, and situations, and that is acknowledged. And I think the authors did well to at least acknowledge it and say, hey, we're not trying to romanticize infidelity, but we do want to put out that there was an emotional infidelity going on here and do a little better there, which is what I think storylines often do and what we can learn from novels as well. I feel the same way about it with Something Borrowed and The Light We've Lost. I get why these plot devices are put in here and how they have major repercussions at the end, which I appreciate. I do think there needs to be major repercussions to the choices that are made in that, whether they're tragic or not. But I do think it does put out a sense of how people do love each other and do feel connection, and you should take your chances while you can. Otherwise, you might end up regretting it along the way, and then bad things can happen. In the case of The Light We Lost, Lucy and Gabe were soulmates and meant to be, but sadly, they always had bad timing. They made different choices in life. And as a result, there was a repercussion to their infidelity in which did produce a loving, lovely child, but eventually it did create a lot of repercussions along the way where Gabe tragically passes away without knowing he has a child and won't raise that child. And it also causes a repercussion for Lucy's husband, Darren, because he's raising this child as his own, but he's also having to deal with the fact that his now ex-wife is ended up having this child from an affair and the repercussions that came from that, which led to their divorce. At least that's what I gather from what happened in the sequel to this book. So there was a repercussion to that that needed to be addressed, and I think was not necessarily romanticizing cheating. It was more about telling the story of how you can not giving up the chance to really tell someone you love them and be with them if you can. And this is different from Something Borrowed and Light We Lost, where there are major repercussions to the infidelity that occurs. In Something Borrowed, Rachel is very heartbroken about the fact that her friendship with Darcy has ended, even though she always had some kind of deep-seated resentment to Darcy for different reasons. She knows deep down that the infidelity was wrong and she's lost her best friend as a result of it because she did care about Darcy and that was a best friend that mattered to her. And then you have The Light We Lost, which had a major repercussion in the sequel where Lucy and her husband end up divorcing because of the infidelity that occurred between Lucy and Gabe. And there is a tragic aspect to it as well because Gabe ends up passing away, not knowing that he does have a child with Lucy, which he never gets to know or raise himself. And while Darren is a great guy for loving and raising that child as if it was his own, there was a repercussion to which Darren, even though he was a little flaky, was still a good, decent man, has to now divorce Lucy because of the pain from that infidelity. And also, there is that aspect of Samuel not knowing the reality of who his biological father really is, Lucy having to deal with that in the sequel. Again, I haven't read that book, so I'm not really sure. But in going back to The Lightly Lost, I do think it was being framed as how Lucy and Gabe were soulmates who never got their chance or their opportunity to be together and weren't really on the same page or trying to do it because of bad timing in different situations and where they were in their lives at different points in times over that 13 years. So there is a major repercussion that I think needed to happen, and I don't think it was necessarily trying to romanticize infidelity, but I do think it was trying to highlight how there is a repercussion to this infidelity and how tragic it is to lose someone you love, but you also need to deal with the repercussions of it, which I hope makes sense here. I hope those concluding opinions made a little sense. I did a little freestyle there, but a lot of this talk about infidelity and romance storylines really came from all the things I've seen on the internet lately about valid critiques of romanticizing infidelity and are we doing that unintentionally and where does that exactly come from? And is the infidelity somewhat justified or understandable given the storylines that happen? And some of that also comes from what I've been seeing lately, where people want to read more romance stories or at least have more highlighted romance stories where infidelity isn't a plot device in there, where they want to see some romance stories that tell a little bit more about how people have these struggles more due to internal factors and things that they have to work on together. And some of that does come from me watching the recent miniseries Seeking Persephone, and this is based on a best-selling novel by Sarah M. Eden. And I haven't read the book, but according to people who have, they say that the film and the book do have similar storylines and it's very close to the source material. But basically, this is a Regency era romance story about two people who are in arranged marriage of convenience. Persephone is the daughter of a genteel family who's struggling financially, and she decides to selflessly accept the proposal of a wealthy duke in order to save her family from financial ruin, whereas Adam, who is the duke, is a cold, distant man due to trauma in his childhood, as well as the facial scars that he has externally and the scars inside him that are internal from that childhood trauma. He needs to produce an heir, and when he hears about a family that's in financial ruin, needs little help, he decides to make this proposal of a arranged marriage of convenience. He thinks this woman is going to be kind of a plain Jane and a little bit older, but when he discovers she's a young, beautiful woman, it creates this whole problem with him because now he has no clue how to go about things and really try to make her happy. And Persephone has no idea how to deal with her husband who's still cold and has these walls built up. And what's great about that story is you see two people trying to really understand each other, and that's where a lot of the tension and the drama, but also the buildup comes. They're trying to get to know each other, understand each other, and really trying to see where this could go and how they can make each other both happy and what they can do to compromise, negotiate, and have it through very thoughtful conversations where they do try to make it work in that sense. There's no infidelity, there's no longing and yearning for someone outside this marriage. There's no third wheel factor in it. There is a best friend named Harry, of course, but he's more of a supportive individual to both of them. He's a good, loyal friend to both of them, and he wants to see them have a good life together. And that's what made it very charming, delightful, slow burn romance story, where the factor was just the two of them really struggling to say how they feel and really trying to make this work in a way because it is an arranged marriage of convenience. And that's what made it such a delightful story because it was about two people where the drama and tension came from just themselves and trying to figure out what they needed to do from there, not because of infidelity or some other factors in that regard. Of the other romance novels I can think of that don't have infidelity in it as a plot device are Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuinton. And this is about two people in a genuine relationship with growth and development, even as they face potential backlash and ostracization because they are a male male romantic relationship. And one is a member of the British royal family, the other is a son of a well known politician. So that causes confliction in their relationship. But outside of that, there is no infidelity, no cheating, and any sort, whether it's emotional or physical. Another one is Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan, where the two people in this relationship do have a genuine relationship that is very important to them, and they do stick by each other through ups and downs, even family opposition. Say You'll Remember Me by Abby Jimenez, where the long distance relationship that happens between the couple is strange, but they stay faithful, especially through ups and downs. Evie Drake Starts Over by Linda Holmes, where a relationship grows well between two people, but they ultimately part ways for a short time because they need to face their personal issues and they ultimately come back to give it another try, where it's not infidelity, it's just personal issues they're going through. And the final one is And Now Back to You by B.K. Borison, where it's very much an enemies to lovers story where the relationship evolves quickly in a positive way, where both lift each other up. There's no infidelity. It's just getting to know each other and lifting each other up in their careers once they realize, hey, we have a connection, this can work, and maybe we can see where it goes. Now, for myself, I still do enjoy the infidelity in romance novels as a plot device. I get why it's there and I understand it. And depending on the book, it can be very well written and used successfully. At the same time, I do think it's good that we do have conversations about this and debate it a little bit more, as I do think there is valid criticisms for it. I do think there is a sense of how we put infidelity in a romance novel for different reasons. But in the end, people do get hurt in this, and we wouldn't want that to happen to us. So we have to figure out where to go from there and how we should write infidelity in romance novels, even if it's just emotional only. I also think it's good that we do have these conversations and that we do want to start to embrace more healthier relationships and storylines and where it goes from there. Because sometimes the tension, drama, and buildup in a relationship can just be two people having problems with each other internally and separately that they need to work on together and really give it a go and try. And there are plenty of examples of that, as I just mentioned earlier. And I do think it's good that we embrace it a little bit more, have those discussions, and also have the infidelity that is critiqued so we can really understand what we want from our romance novels and our storylines. Now, this concludes my entire video, and I hope you enjoyed. I realize it was a little bit different from my normal type of videos, as well as a little bit of freestyle here and there, but I hope you enjoyed and it's got you to thinking about a great discussion on this. Now, tell me what you think. Do you agree with me, not agree with me? Do you think infidelity in romance novels is a reliable plot device, romanticized too much, both, or something else? Are there other books that you can recommend where they use infidelity in a romance novel to a good, important degree that is well written and makes sense? Or do you think there is an infidelity in romance novel that does romanticize cheating? Do you think it's one or the other, both? Let me know in the comments section below. I welcome all discussions as always. And I thank you so much for tuning in. Now, next week I will be having a double book review. The following week will be a different type of video, not freestyle this time. And I'll also be wrapping up my summer reads reviews for 2026 in the final video for Sunday in August. And I'm also going to come back on Wednesdays with more random videos, as well as Friday with more food videos, and put some more shorts in. And I hope you do enjoy those. I thank you again so much for tuning in. Please be sure to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell. I'll be back to see you soon. Bye.